Hello and welcome to Gotham Sound TV. I am very, very honored to introduce to you Jeff Pullman. And we are just two people chatting about sound and our experiences, Jeff's experiences, doing production sound. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Peter.
Hi. Jeff and I have known each other for a long time. I think you were, you and Matt Price were one of the very first sound mixers I ever met. That
Later
like more
90s
than once.
probably.
Yeah, well, yeah. I think mid 90s. Like I remember Jeannie Gill and as a boom operator telling me about this guy Jeff Pullman, and we met soon after that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess I will start off by because we were talking about our experiences at SUNY Purchase. I went to SUNY Purchase. Jeff, also you went to SUNY Purchase. What years were you there?
77, 80 or 81. 81, I guess.
Yeah. And it's got a funny name, and for people that don't know, SUNY Purchase is a state university of New York, which means that the tuition was affordable. And this particular film program was run like a conservatory, and it was meant for directors, but it also we all had to do crew. Like I think directing was one part of the program. But, it was you were saying there were how many people were in?
20 a year they would take.
Yeah. Same mine. I think by the time it rolled around to me, it was 30. But it really was like a formative experience.
I found it to be that basically because it was a small school environment, in essence, very small classes. So you really had a lot of hands-on and interaction, and it was so small that everybody was really helping everybody out.
Including the teachers.
In essence, yeah. Not so much for me.
Right. Well, I mean, but
more,
like in terms of crew and like working for them.
Yeah, I think early they were trying to kind of make classes where they were kind of involved with actually making films.
Yeah.
They would get some kind of funding, independent funding for some music thing or something, and the students would actually be involved with all that. Which,
for me was a good experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a great time there.
What brought you to Purchase?
It goes way back, Peter.
Yeah.
I was the moth in the light. Basically from when I was in elementary school. I went to some show in school, in my elementary school, and saw the lights on stage, and that somehow took me into, somehow I'm going to be there. I wanted to be the guy up in the rafters running the arc light, which of course...
It was exactly the same experience for me.
Really?
It was technical theater that drew me into film. Yeah.
Right, and who knew? You don't know TV, you don't know film, certainly at that young age. But through my earlier school years prior, I just was somehow heading there all the time. There was just something about it. And basically, I think it was high school that really kind of launched it for me.
Yeah.
I had a teacher there who was really a chemistry teacher, but was somehow took on this, New York City had kind of implemented this program, and the high school I went to, they actually were putting in one of the first TV studios in a high school back in the early 70s, I guess. So I became involved with that, and through that he was showing kind of independent, not really independent films, I don't think you can call it that then, but short films, art films in class, even though he was kind of crossing that line between film and television, and we had a monochromatic studio that we kind of built, very basic video in those days, but was one of the first in the city. So I became really involved with that. It didn't really, but I was also a musician prior to that, so I have to kind of jump back a little bit. Not really a musician literally, but I would play in bands and do things like that. So I had an interest in sound. And one day he kind of showed this one film that kind of just pushed me.
What was the film?
I don't think I can remember the name of it, honestly. It was some kind of animation, abstract-y thing that seemed to relate to music.
Interesting.
So I kind of, just kind of put some things in my brain.
Yeah.
which kind of led to this kind of visual music idea. So this thing that, you know, I had in my head of color, sound, I play music, I was into that whole thing. So I think what really kind of took me somewhere was we were, in those days, you could actually bring your camera into a, you know, a concert. Right. So we started doing Super 8 films at the concerts and stills. And along with a friend of mine in high school, we basically created this multimedia show. It was to a Moody Blues song. But we actually hooked up like 7 projectors. We took all the projectors in the school and made this show and synchronized it. We had like 16mm film, and then I created other visuals on slides that we'd project along with the movies that we took. And it became a kind of a big thing in the school at the time.
Yeah, all that's making a comeback now, by the way. That sort of analog
right.
You know, film style.
Right.
Liquid light style.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to create.
Yeah.
So graduating high school, I ended up going to Hunter initially for TV. And after a year and a half there, I decided that film is really what I realized film was really what I needed to do.
And was it at SUNY Purchase that your interest in production sound?
That's where I discovered it.
And how did that come about?
I worked in the equipment store at the time.
Yeah.
And just started taking a liking to the whole thing. I mean, you know, I was doing, in high school, we were doing recordings of our bands and things. Friends had tape recorders. I just became very interested in recording. So I think that discovering that in college, that, you know, that it just became something I started playing around with.
And so after college, tell me about what New York was like. You stayed in New York after college?
Certainly.
And what was that like for film and working in sound and film?
Well, I jump back a little bit. In college, I was doing Columbia student films, NYU student films, SUNY Purchase films, and I'd probably done 40 or so student films even before I got out of school. So I think my name was kind of out there a little bit.
Nice.
Bob Goss, who went to SUNY Purchase.
Sure.
Sometime after I had come out and started working, not really as a sound person, but doing animation at a company, or at least working on their tabletop animations. It kind of opened the door for me to meet people. And one day, Bob Goss, formerly of SUNY Purchase, basically called me up and he said, this guy, Hal Hartley, is a student at Purchase, is making this no-budget movie. Would you be available and interested? And I took that on. It was a freebie.
Well, what year was this?
Late 80s.
So which film was Hal's?
It was actually called The Cartographer's Girlfriend, which was the short film he made after he graduated SUNY Purchase.
And was that, but you had done sound on a bunch of student films up to that point.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
But was this, why was this a formative event for you?
I wouldn't necessarily say it was a formative event. I had already been involved in doing it, but a SUNY Purchase student, you know, someone of an alumni.
Yeah.
You know, at that time in my career, you basically grab anything you could. You know, you want to do more films, get more credits. So I think that was the initial aspect of it. I didn't know Hal. I didn't really know Bob. But certainly that transcended that and continued for many years after.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're always pursuing, you know, when you're building your career, you're going to basically grab anything that comes along.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because there's a, you know, I think when you're first starting out, there's a lot of pressure to not do jobs below a certain rate. And I think that that's really difficult. And I think, you know, one of the factors that you should consider about whether you would take a job that's not, you know, certainly like a freebie or something like that is what can you get out of it? You know you're not going to get the money that you want out of it.
Certainly. Well, I think it was a different era.
Yeah.
Certainly. I mean, film was very expensive then. We were shooting film.
Yeah.
Didn't really have video. So it was a cost. And so, things to do anything on a low budget was going to cost some money. So they were always on the lookout for what can I get for free.
Yeah.
And I don't even know what Hal may have spent, maybe a few $1,000s, which I'm sure was a lot of money as a coming out of school for him. But he was a very smart guy, and he really had thoughts of where his future was already going. So I didn't know him then, but it was a very short, maybe a 3-day shoot. I think it was a long time ago. I don't really remember. Yeah. But and we kind of hit it off, and I really kind of saw something in him and what he was doing. Yeah. And of course, I went off to do other things, and then when he actually got the money to do a feature, there I was. So. And you
were his first call for sound.
I was.
And what film was his first feature?
Unbelievably, Unbelievable Truth. The Unbelievable Truth. Unfortunately, I wasn't available to do it.
Which is also the reality of freelance.
Right. Yeah. There were a lot of things that progressed for me. I had a lot of opportunities, which was really nice. But in those early days, there weren't that many people doing these, films.
Right.
And of course, there weren't all that many sound people. So either you were in the union and you were getting the jobs, and I don't even know, maybe a handful of sound mixers who were vying for those jobs. It wasn't that much work, or some of that TV, of course. But as an independent and non-union, you were really, it was either documentaries, maybe a commercial here or there, if you can break into those companies.
Right. I remember industrials being its own
industrials,
category.
Right, exactly.
And then
go interview some CEO.
And by the time I was mixing, it was there was industrials and documentaries, and there was this independent film which Hal Hartley had really he was one of the first people that made that a viable thing. It was really Hal Hartley and Steven Soderbergh, as I remember it. It was them together, made this money. Start chasing those kind of projects.
Right, but still very low budgets.
Right, very, very low budgets. And then the other category, and I put them in their own category, was Turtleback Productions, which we both have worked for.
Right, exactly.
But I think that's one of the, that's one of the contributions that doesn't really get talked about that Hal made was New York independent film before Hal was really catch as catch can, and then I think he legitimized, and there were a couple of other...
Well, making a low-budget movie that was going to be marketable and viable, as opposed to, and I've done a number of these even prior to that or just after that, either in my years of booming, where, another mixer would hire me as a boom operator, by the way, which I advocate for, as if you're going to be a mixer to... let's do that. But go ahead.
Here, let's talk about that as a formal thing. So, when you got out of college, did you immediately make business cards that said Jeff Pullman Production Sound Mixer, or what did you hire yourself at? Sell yourself?
I was a sound guy. I was a mixer because really a lot of it was one-man band type of thing. So. That's where you go, and you threw your Nagra over the shoulder, and you were doing the documentary or setting up the mics or in a stand or whatever you were doing interview-wise.
Yeah.
So I think that's where, we kind of cut our chops. Yeah. You had to boom it. Wireless were not all that viable back then. And you were working independently, and when you got the call to do somebody got a feature, I wasn't expecting that I was just going to be the guy to get a call to mix, not having all that many narrative credits, that, I'd be a boom guy. Yeah. And so there were a few people who hired me as boom early on, but I was still mixing, if you want to call it mixing. I don't know if you'd really label it as mixing, you were a recordist.
Yeah.
Right, where you went out and you were the guy doing it. And even to this day, some of these independent films are done by one person, right?
Yes, still, yeah.
It's a different approach, of course. But I think back then, the boom was really what we, fought for.
Yes.
And figured out how to do it. And we had maybe 2 or 3 microphones we could use going into a mono recording Nagra. And my days were pre-stereo Nagra. So we really had one track, 3 microphones max.
Right.
Even those little mixers didn't exist yet.
Because that's what was convenient or possible to plug into a mono Nagra.
Mono Nagra, but even how do you handle more than that as a one-man band?
Yeah.
And how much did a Nagra weigh? I don't even remember, but 12 D
2 or 3,
cells.
2 or 3 vertebrae at least.
Yeah, and for years this shoulder, not good.
No.
Until they came up with the brace. I mean the harness. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. Where will we?
No, I think your experience as a boom operator. I would like you to talk about how your experience as a boom operator informed your mixing.
Mm-hmm. No, that's. I think that's what it's all about, ultimately. And through my career, I'll get to that. But I just think through my career, I point to 3 films in my career. 2 of them being in my early career, and then I waited for 20 years for another opportunity similar. To conceptualize that. But being a boom person, and I still advocate for this, anybody I mentor these days, I tell them, do some booming in your career. And here's why. You're going to understand the limitations of what the boom is able to do relative to what the camera's doing, and you'll understand it better from being on set. If you only mix through your whole career and never have an understanding of what a boom operator deals with, you're going to ask that boom person to do things that he's going to tell you, I can't do it, and you're going to get pissed that he can't do it.
Right.
And I think that's important. I learned a lot about microphones because you work with different mixers who may use different microphones, and listening to different microphones, you understand the limits of how that particular microphone works. Its pattern, what you can get away with, and how to manipulate it. So it really, that's the thing that's kept me going through all these years, is conceptualizing sound that way. What is that microphone capable of doing? What is this scene? And even though it's going to be one microphone, how do we make that work for that particular scene, or even 2 microphones? But that perspective is what I'm talking about, and how you can manipulate that to make it work to your advantage.
And I know we're jumping around a little bit, but is that your philosophy when you're on set and you're watching the blocking? Is walk me through your thought process.
Thought process. Well, the first thing we see is the blocking, and we kind of get an idea of where after that we kind of get an idea of what the cameras are initially going to do. Of course, there's probably going to be a wide shot, closer shots, and what are they intending to do? Is it going to play as one shot? Is it going to be a dolly shot? And is it going to be multi-camera for that matter? So basically, it's about thinking initially about, can we get the booms in there? Because I think that's the way you really want to go. And then the potentials of, do we have to wire all the actors? Maybe only wire one actor because they're going to be arriving from the distance and we want to make a transition from the wire to the boom, if that's possible. So that's really kind of the basic idea as far as I'm concerned. However, I do a lot of listening, and I have always over the years, and I've always advocated to not be so technical about things, but to actually listen. And how can I make this scene work aesthetically? So maybe, I don't know if I can come up with an example per se, but off the top of my head, but if in order to cover an entire, let's say 3 or 4 actors in a scene, you may not want the microphone to be as close as it can be to the frame line. So you can play the microphone further back and still maintain a consistent perspective while cueing maybe 3 or 4 actors. So that's kind of my philosophy. I'm not always chasing the frame line. So you might get a little more air sounding in the room or something, but it's going to sound very natural and real in the room. So that's my goal. Part of this has just come out of experience. Hal Hartley's Trust, actually the first feature I did with Hal. A lot of what's happened there is we're booming a lot of the off-screen dialogue. He's presenting the actors kind of in the foreground, but really what's happening in the scene is actors are crossing back and forth in the background or off-screen, but he's not going to cover them. It's just that on the screen. And then we actually have to set a microphone for the person sitting in the foreground as a two-man crew. I'm going to put it on a stand. And then we had to actually boom all the off-screen background stuff.
Interesting. Because
so that
the person in the foreground is not moving so much.
So we had to do that. So it's just through the working or discussions initially about how Hal's going to do a film, and this of course was a learning process for me too. He has a very stylized way of presenting actors.
Tell me about that conversation with Hal. Was it on a technical level? Was he talking about the aesthetics of what?
Having done seeing his first film, he was already had a direction, I think. He's also a painter. I remember him doing some paintings early on, and we actually shared a space briefly up in the Bronx. And remember seeing some of his paintings, and he played music, and I think some of that actually stems from his painting. It's become, he paints his frame with kind of a portrait. And then these sounds come around, it's kind of off-screeny. He's come up with some very strange ideas and approached me about them, where he actually wanted to do a film where all the dialogue was off-screen. Or a totally blown perspective of somebody's on screen, but the microphone is 20 feet away.
That would be very challenging.
It would be very bizarre, and but he's done some bizarre things. He actually did an opera. I don't know if you're familiar.
No.
And I don't know if there's a video of it because I've asked him about it. But we were on the set of, and I believe it was Trust, and he came up with this idea. He was fascinated, and he approached me about it. He said, "I'm just fascinated with what the boom guy does." And I'm like, really? And then years later, he developed this opera where it's a stage performance, of course, not on film, where he actually had the actors booming each other.
Wow.
I know. So it's kind of kabuki, or I don't know how you would describe it, but they would actually be doing this while that person's dialogue, and then the other person would boom. So he really had a forethought about it. Yes, really interesting stuff.
I feel like this is a good opportunity to show a clip from a Hal Hartley.
We could do that.
Tell me about the clips that you'd like to show.
The first, this is an example of where someone is in the foreground, one of the actors, and we're booming off-screen dialogue, and I can talk about that because it's really, really one boom that's covering all this off-screen.
Interesting.
So then he gives me back the $5 and he still wants me to kiss him.
Oh, gross. Disgusting.
I was so scared, and he's like sweating and rubbing his crotch and everything.
So what did you do?
What do you think I did?
You burned him with a cigarette.
Right in the eye.
Ouch.
That man is going straight to hell.
And he's threatening to call the cops on me.
So was this before or after the baby disappeared?
Just before it.
You've got to go to the police, Maria.
Yes, that man should be punished.
No, about the baby.
Well, I don't know. I can't be sure. I didn't see anything.
Well, maybe they can talk to her.
She seems so sad, so mixed up.
We're all mixed up, Maria. We don't go around stealing babies.
You see, you're already convinced that she did it.
So what are you going to do?
About what?
About being pregnant.
You ain't the father, are you?
No, ma'am.
Mom.
Eat your sandwich.
I went to the clinic yesterday, and I spoke to this lady.
How much?
I need about $250.
What, for an abortion? Don't look at me. I spent everything we had on your father's casket.
The divorce lawyers took all my money.
Then I'll get a job.
I've got money.
No, thank you.
It's okay.
Why don't you get it from Anthony?
I never want to see that jerk again.
Take the money from me.
No, you don't have a job either.
I'm going to take this job fixing TVs.
Maria, where did you get that dress?
Belonged to my mother.
So walk me through your approach to that scene.
Basically, we two-man crew, so we had one boom person. I was actually Tom Paul, by the way.
It's amazing. He just had a baby.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, anyways.
We're going to leave that in there?
Yeah, we should.
Okay. Congratulations, Tom.
Congratulations.
Who haven't seen in a long time, unfortunately. Basically, we put a mic on a stand to cover Adrian in the foreground, and Tom was actually booming all that dialogue off screen in the background. I somehow remember that we had to control that a little bit because the actors were kind of moving. I think it was Martin who was way over on the right, and then he passes through, and the ladies were over there, one's right there. Right. So, you know, there was a bit of a swing. Yeah. So I think at some point we actually controlled a little bit, even though she had a, she played to him there, but Hal really wanted to kind of be real. Right. But we still had to be able to. So you asked, we condensed it a little bit. Right. Yeah. Because the looks still have to be. Exactly. Right. So he moved over behind her, and then it kind of became, let's group them over here so we can really kind of cover it a little. Yeah. So you know, we did have some forethought about, you know, but every step of the way, as simple as how things are or seem, they're really generally not. Did he sort of, for lack of a better expression, John Ford that? Was there any coverage at all, or that was it? That was it. He's very decisive about this is how I'm going to cover it, and there you go. So it's good because there's great. Yeah. I mean, basically, you can go to him and ask him, and what's the intention, and what are we doing, and you'll get an answer and know how to handle it or figure it out anyway. I mean, sort of a loaded question to come from that discussion about Hal Hartley, but you know, that was how long ago was that? That was early 90s, right? Yeah. Late 80s even, maybe. Talk to me about how things have changed over the years. With Hal? Well, I think for your job in general. It's in DC. Oops. How did it change for me? Were you always able to work with directors that had such a clear vision? Oh, I see. Some, yes, but it seemed like I was waiting a long time to really kind of find that. Yeah. Partly because of the types of jobs I was getting, or maybe, you know, it's just not necessarily with directors who had gone all that far. So, you know, could have been a first-time director making a film who didn't really know, and maybe I could then coerce them into giving us what we needed. Some of them are just very headstrong, even though they're not very experienced, had a lot of insecurities about their abilities, and therefore were trying to be the boss and wouldn't let you necessarily, wouldn't really hear you, even though you were trying to explain we should handle something a certain way. And I think that that's one of the key frustrations for any production sound mixer is, you know, inexperienced directors don't really understand the consequences of their decisions until the editing room. Right. That's where they really kind of, hopefully they're sitting there saying, I remember this discussion, yeah. And but I don't know. Some do, some don't. Yeah. Some don't necessarily get another chance either. What advice would you give to people starting out in terms of what do you say to a director? How do you talk to a director and make sure that they're aware of what you need and whether you are or aren't getting what you need? Well, I think that starts in pre-production. You know, you try to get as much information from them about what their intention is or how it's going to be shot, and you probably will connect with the DP as well, because he's already discussing that with the director, and they are in cahoots, and they have a plan, hopefully. Right. So you can glean a lot of information in pre-production. The reality then sets in on set, especially for maybe a first-timer, about how long things are really taking to create that scene. And therefore the producers get involved with, like, why are we shooting 14-hour days? And they start, you're over budget and this and that, and then the stresses start coming in. So you need to kind of get a hold of the concept early on. A lot of it is just direct, like, we need to get good dialogue, and you go to them and you say, you know, it would be good if we could do this or that. And what I mean by that is, you know, we've started the scene in one way with the boom, and now you want me to wire, even though we discussed that we weren't going to, and now that whole sound might very well change.
Right.
We've started in one direction and you've changed your mind, or just driven to that because of other extenuating circumstances. So I think pre-production is really vital. It gives you insight into the potentials, especially if you have enough experience prior in terms of doing other projects, that you can kind of get a sense of how things are going to go.
And do you, you talked about there being different kinds of work out there. Do you approach, say, episodic television differently than how you would approach features in terms of pre-production and on-set decisions?
Well, certainly that. I'll jump back a little bit because in my boom years, where I was doing some mixing, that gaining that experience of understanding how to manipulate a microphone, what your limitations might be, how to communicate with the camera operator and so on, what you can really get away with. I started in the days prior to video. Mm-hmm. And basically,
and when you say prior to video, you mean also video assist. Yeah.
That's what I actually mean.
All right, yeah.
Having a video monitor actually look at and see what the camera shot really is.
Yep.
You would actually have to go as a boom person and go to the camera operator and say, what are we doing?
Right.
And especially if it's a dolly shot. Yeah. I remember getting on the dolly and they're riding and guiding me through the shot. Yeah. We're going to go tighter here. We're going to be looser here. We're going to have a 2-shot here. We're going to move off that 2-shot to a single of so-and-so. Yeah. And really having that communication. Yeah. And I think that's the issue of today, where I know how to manipulate a microphone. I know what this particular microphone is capable of, and that's where I make my microphone choices, having all that experience behind me. But basically, that communication is what has really kind of, I feel, broken down in terms of the transition of the way the technology has changed the business and how things are communicated now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things about film was the you know, there was a formality about it that I think helped communication.
I agree with that.
I like grain. I like the way film looks, but I appreciate the kind of care that went along with it.
Well, I think part of that was economics. Mm-hmm. You had a certain amount of film, and you couldn't waste it. So you really had to kind of be prepared and walk in and say, you know, I have a 3-to-1 ratio. And this is, you know, which is small, of course, not a major motion picture, but if you're limited that way, where it's going to cost you that much money, you really damn well better be prepared.
Right, and so that meant rehearsing.
Certainly. Yeah. And now, you know, I feel like so much of that has gone by the wayside. Certainly, and I think the younger generation coming into the business will not experience it the same way. There's no way they can. Mm-hmm. But the whole thing of multi-track relative to being able to get it on set on, you know, maybe mixing to 1 or 2 tracks. It's kind of open things where it's more about quantity over quality. I think we can phrase it that way. There is, in terms of, you know, basically, I'm just lost for a second, but yeah, prompt me again. I'm sorry.
Well, no. I mean, I wonder, like, if so, you know, it's very tempting. You know, we could turn this into 2 old guys between 2 ferns reminiscing about the old days, and I don't think that's helpful. It's fun, but I don't think it's helpful for other people. And I wonder, you know, how do you when these kind of situations come up on set where you know, they're not doing a rehearsal, where people are even I've had it where camera operators are not sure what the shot is exactly. How do you handle that?
Well, I think we're forced into handling it.
Yes.
I think the situation is that, you know, we've come to, of recent times, be more reliant on wiring actors as opposed to thinking a scene through and how you can play that. Mm-hmm. And we can look at, you know, films from the 70s, 80s, 90s and how the sound has changed, what's acceptable. But these days, I think everything kind of sounds the same. How do you handle it? Well, for example, I'm on a TV series now, and In the initial stages, we were really fighting to get the booms in, and every step of the way over a 2-year period, we would be, from the production perspective, wasting time trying to figure out how to make the booms work.
Right.
So we'd end up being forced into wiring. The show I'm on, basically, it came to me that, the editors want you to use more wires. And I'm like, why? I don't know if that was really the editor saying that or whoever was saying that.
Right.
And maybe I'm opening a can of worms here and getting myself in trouble. I don't know, but
all right. We can make this as generic as you like.
Okay, but
on a show when post production, or you're told post production,
right, we want more wires, and then I go to them and say, why are we not getting what we need? Well, they just want to, in case there's a line or something, they want to be able to go to it. I'm like, but it's going to sound different than if we boom it. And then, next thing I know, within some months, we really want to start shooting 3 cameras, even though we're shooting 2 cameras almost all the time. Now we want to start shooting 3 cameras all the time. And then it becomes a thing of going to the DP and saying, do we need to shoot the wide shot and the closer shots at the same time? And the DP doesn't even get involved anymore. He says, go ask the director. Mm-hmm. It's up to the director. And then you'll get a director who doesn't care. It's TV. Mm-hmm. If it was a movie, certainly it would be a different thing. Mm-hmm. But for television, they don't really care. It's going to be wires. It's become that game. Again, jumping back, the boom was always the thing we relied on. Less wireless were just not that reliable. In the earlier days, things were harder to hide. They were bigger, larger mics. It just didn't work the same. It was much more challenging to do so. And I think Woody Allen was, I've been looking at some of his films kind of recently, going back to different eras, just listening to how things sounded then and how they now. Mm-hmm. Basically, some of those scenes, it just sounds wide and not quite right on the perspective. And I suspect maybe they attempted to wire it. Mm-hmm. Maybe the wires didn't work as well, but I think, and I've never worked with him unfortunately, but I think he likes to having the original sound, not necessarily dubbing scenes. So they just said, okay, this is how it's going to sound.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't know that this will make it part mm-hmm. of what we're doing, but I was brought in on his Amazon TV series. I forget the name of it. Oh, mm-hmm. Because they had an especially large day where they had a lot of cast in a small space, and the producer said, the mixer said, if we're going to have all these people at once, mm-hmm. I don't have enough wireless mics, and so we need to bring somebody in who will cover everybody and have one multi-track with everybody wired. And I was told Woody Allen said, we don't need that person. And the producer overrode him and brought me in anyways as a safety.
For wiring.
For wiring. So just to have everybody on their own track. Mm-hmm. And, so like getting to meet one of your idols, filmmaking idols, and then, knowing that you're the guy that he's explicitly said is not required.
Well, not required because
But he had a clear vision of how he was going to shoot it. And it would have been a huge burden, to be fair, on the main mixer, which was Dave Schwartz. Mm-hmm. He would have had to run different packs on and off people. Sure. But just in the way that he covered it, you could cover it with,
in the boom.
See that? Yeah, well, that and the number of wires that he had, but it was definitely manageable. Mm-hmm. I think I think a lot of it is like in this case, the push came from the producer, like a knee-jerk safety almost.
They're just, right, they don't really understand how to do sound, and now they're insecure about how to do sound, and they're not really relying on the expert. I've always felt that if you have a multi-dialogue, multi-character scene, mm-hmm. You're certainly gonna go in for coverage, so you're gonna hopefully be able to control things, to a certain degree. But I've always felt that if it's a cacophony of people or something, it's going to work better on a boom than having everybody wired and then trying to squeeze everybody into being audible. Right. So it really doesn't make sense. And I guess what you're saying is it's a protection, and they just feel more secure in having it as opposed to maybe, maybe risking it in some way, but I don't believe that's a risk necessarily.
No, I agree. I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about Laws of Gravity. Independent film shot in the early 90s in Brooklyn, is that right?
Yes. Nick came to me at the very beginning before pre-production, and he said, yeah, Jeff, I think you're going to have to wire a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I well, tell me what you're thinking, and well, everybody's going to be talking a lot, and it's going to be, they rehearsed for months, as I remember. And basically, he said, you're going to have to wire actors. And I'm like, how are we going to do that? You got such a small crew. It's like, in essence, a documentary-sized crew.
Right.
Go ahead.
No,
sorry.
No.
Are
Let's
we
talk
going?
about it. Yeah, we're going. Yeah. So Nick, I fucked it up. I interrupted you. So Nick was saying, how are you going to do that?
So I said, no, here's my plan. Because I anticipated, read the script, and this is what it seems like to me. Tell me if I'm wrong. But they were all very insecure about it. And I'm like, no, I know how to kind of do this. And that just stems from a lot of documentary experience. So that boom operating thing, and then in conjunction with doing documentary and kind of thinking about, we're walking into a cinema verite situation, how am I gonna, let's follow the camera, let's see what the camera's doing. And be very observant of what camera's doing. Also, in the old days, remember we had the zoom stick on the camera, and you knew up was tighter, down was wider. So you'd watch what the cameraman was doing with his zoom stick, and you'd actually know to go in a little tighter or looser and be able to play perspective. So having that experience, and then going to do Nick Gomez's Laws of Gravity, I knew it was going to be a challenge, but at the same time, I felt that it was, I knew how to do that movie. Now, of course, they gave me a boom person, who was Jeannie Gilliland.
Yeah.
And we get to the street on the first day, and basically the first shot up is a block-long walk and talk. Handheld camera, walking backwards.
Yeah.
And like I said, we let her try it a few times, and this is, of course, her first real time. She knows she wants to do sound, and I think after I had to jump in and then start booming, we realized how that movie was really going to go.
Yeah, and just to be fair, my limited booming experience went along those lines exactly. Kids, I did a scene that Jen McLaughlin was mixing, and she immediately jumped in and said, "Here, you stand by the." I think it was a PD2 at the time. You stand by the PD2, and I'll boom this one.
Okay.
But I think that's I think to be fair, because I feel like that is a kind of rite of passage. I think one of the jobs of a production sound mixer, and I wonder if you agree with this, is to protect the boom operator.
Certainly. Certainly. No, I will always, again, this is why I advocate that you should have some boom experience to become a mixer, because then you can jump in and know what the issues might be and really help them and advocate for them. So not just leave them in the lurch on a set where they're fighting with the camera guy about certain things. So, you really need that kind of experience and knowledge.
Yeah, I traumatized when the mixer didn't protect me, and it was actually, there's a Frank Prinzi shop film. There was Tom DiCillo's, what became Tom DiCillo's first feature, where Frank Prinzi jumped in and was like, "Are you okay?" Like, he really protected me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, anyways,
Prinzi was DP, I'm assuming.
Yeah, he was.
That's surprising. DP.
Well, I think they all wanted to go home, but he was also being very nice.
I see. Right.
So,
and it's not that it was protecting. I mean, we knew what we had to do, and she was just part of the group, and no one was freaking out. But I just knew that you have to jump in and then say, "Here, you know what? This is not really going to be happening the way I thought."
Right.
And so, we worked together. We figured it out. And the next day, what we ended up doing was putting the Nagra on my back. I was booming. I was carrying the Nagra on my back, and she was wearing a bag with an SQN mixer, because I anticipated this movie going from people speaking softly to screaming, and we needed very good limiters.
Yes.
So I actually was just using this little mixer, which had very good limiters, as preamp, in order to, be able to control what I needed to do. But at the same time, I was using the boom mic as the volume control.
And tell me how you did that.
Again, from documentary experience and knowing microphones and listening very carefully while we're working, basically as the volume got louder, I would actually be moving the microphone further away. And I would be able to hear slightly that, I'm hitting the limiter a little bit, and I'd be that, and come back in, and I knew what the camera was doing because of the zoom stick. So there's a lot of observational aspects to it, but also didn't hurt to have a really great camera operator on that show, and that was Jean, yes. Who was very communicative. It was really his first kind of crossing that narrative documentary line. That's the type of film it was, kind of a narrative documentary.
And just to put it in context,
yes.
It's Jean de Seckensack.
Yes.
And he went on to shoot and then direct Homicide.
Well, Laws of Gravity was kind of the predecessor to that show. Mm-hmm. It was actually, they called up Nick after that movie came out. It was kind of a big deal, Laws of Gravity, for how it was done and how cheaply it was done. Mm-hmm. I believe the initial production budget was $16,000, and we shot 16 millimeter.
Nice. Let's take a look. I think this is a good time to take a look.
So,
do you want to set this clip up?
Yeah, may I? Can I get my notes for a second?
Here are your notes. I have your notes.
How come you have my notes?
Well, I needed a prop.
How did you get my notes? Which one was it? Oh no. Yeah, and now that we're like leading into it, it would have been good to do a loud thing, but girls with John, cops arrive. Oh, this 10. What is it? 10:08, 10:850. That one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this will be a good one. Peter.
Thank you. So tell me, is there anyone you want to set this up?
Yes. So this is a scene where two of the lady actors walking down the street, then joined by another actor. Tensions mount, and it starts in a very conversational way, and then actually gets into a very intense, loud situation. So this is exactly the situation where the microphone starts off really in as tight as possible, and then basically might be 15, 20 feet away by the time things get really loud. So,
excellent. My cousins are all around there. They're gonna have a barbecue.
If I pick up my shoes, then we can like go over there and visit with Tony and all the others.
Yeah,
my
cousin
out.
loves you.
Because I haven't done that in so long.
Celia, listen, I need to talk to you, all right?
All right,
Come
John,
back in the
we'll
house,
talk
okay?
later.
Johnny, she wants to talk later.
I need to talk to you right now. I need to talk to you right now.
She wants to talk to you
Listen,
later,
I can
right?
handle this.
No, let's be cool,
So
okay?
please, Celia,
John,
come on.
please, we
All
talked
right, look,
already.
get out of the way, all right? Please get out of the way. Don't make me push you. Get out of the way, all right? Now listen.
Come on.
Come on,
She don't
Celia,
know,
I gotta
don't
talk to
house
you.
me, right?
Come on, Celia, let me talk to you.
Don't make a
Just let me
scene,
talk to you.
John,
I'm not
right?
touching you.
Come on,
Just
let's
move.
say,
Come on.
John, come on, cut it
No,
out.
you get in the house.
I'm serious.
Get in the house.
I'm serious.
Listen,
Leave
you
her
want some
alone.
too? You want some?
No,
Get
John,
out.
don't.
Celia, get in the house with me.
John,
Come
I
on.
say to you
Come on,
already.
man. Get the
Johnny,
fuck out of my
Johnny,
way.
watch that fucking hand. I'm talking to you. Watch your
Denise,
side.
Johnny, come on. Whoa, fuck. Enough. Talk to him. Come on. Come on, man.
Johnny,
I'm fucking playing with you, man. Stop it. Stop it. Enough. All right? Come on. Bring it up. Bring it up. Bring it up. Police officer. Come on. Bring it up. Come on. Come on. Right here. Come on. Bring it up. Hand behind your back. Where are you taking him? Are you taking him?
That was intense.
Yeah.
And I could say this about that as well. There was a choice of microphone for this particular movie.
Well, which was?
Which was Shep's hypercardioid. Mm-hmm. Because that particular microphone has a little wider, it gives you a sense of a wider hypercardioid. And I knew that we'd be kind of dealing with on and off screen, but also I needed a cardioid for all this volume.
Yes.
And I felt that was like kind of a cross between a literal hypercardioid and a cardioid. So it's about listening, playing that microphone where you're not hearing distortion or anything in limiters. And so it's challenging, but it's really that whole movie is exactly about that.
Yeah, everything is captured there,
Right.
and sounds the way you're right there. It doesn't. I'd be curious to talk to post-production too. Like, it doesn't sound like.
Well, post-production was Nick,
Yeah.
who actually directed and edited.
Yeah.
It was all kind of
It sounds very flat, like they took your tracks. Which whether they did or didn't, it sounds really.
No, this is all original track. Actually, when this movie came out, it was a very big deal. And then not too long after that, Lincoln Center, actually, it was this big thing. Lincoln Center. I vaguely remember
Avery
where.
Fisher Hall.
Maybe
near film festival.
No, it wasn't a film festival. It was specifically for Laws of Gravity, where they were having 2 screenings of it, and there was a Q&A, and all the questions were about the sound. It was like Nick was like, I can't believe this, and this is all about, how did you do that? You wired everybody? How did you do that? And it was like, and this, of course, wires weren't great back then, and I knew we couldn't do this movie with wires.
No, that would sound so radically horrible.
It wouldn't work, yeah.
Yeah.
But this only comes, I think, with having that experience. I don't know, and I'm not tooting my own horn here, but unless you've had like a lot of documentary experience and understand really how to listen and that microphone and what it can do, this might have been a more challenging and difficult movie for other people, but I don't know. I mean,
it also to me sounds like it required a very unique collaboration between you and the DP. And a trust between you two.
Certainly, yes. But Jean was very easy to work with, and actually there were times where we would do a rehearsal, of course, and he would give me a game plan. He would say, "Okay, I'm going to do this way," and then he'd turn to me after we did a take or two, and he'd say, "Okay, when she says this line, I'm going that way, not the other way." He would actually he would be listening.
Yeah.
And it was probably, this is one of the films in my career that it's the one I really point to for all the challenges that were met under these circumstances. There's another scene actually that we did a 720 on one boom, and we had to dodge the sun, and I actually was overhead, and at some point I had to come down the side of the frame while keeping them on mic and come underneath, and then come back over on a 720.
Do we have that?
We do.
Well, let's look.
Bandit bitch that I can. Here comes that fake diamond in the back, sunroof top, sitting in the lean with the gangster lean. Fake faded motherfucking 4-wheel drive driving motherfucker.
Who's that? Jimmy with him?
Yeah. Look at fucking Jimmy making his fucking hair right. He's such a fucking funny guy. But this guy Pistol, man, I don't know where the fuck you found his ass. He was a trip growing up, though, man. He's a bazooka chewing, non-comic reading faggot. Bazooka? What? Bazooka. Oh, man. Uh-oh, Johnny. Back up, brother. A couple of dubious-looking motherfuckers. What's up, Chief? What's happening, Pete? Good to see you.
What's up, man?
Hey, guys.
How you doing? So do some drinking, huh?
Buy a gun? Maybe I will buy a gun,
Really?
yeah.
What the fuck you gonna do with it? No, man.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm gonna put it in my glove compartment.
That's a good place for it, you know?
Yeah, I think so. That's where you would keep it, right?
That's where I would, yes.
So what's the matter, Chief? You not getting along too good with your girl?
Well, the thing is that maybe he'll take him home.
Just that I saw you smacking around pretty good today.
Well, you know, sometimes you gotta just
Show him who's boss, right?
Right, exactly.
Dominate.
Right.
Where you get this guy?
Get who? Him?
Yeah.
He's a
Why
friend
is
of
he
mine.
here?
He's my partner.
Partner,
All right,
partner.
I'm gonna get away from this fucking asshole.
Hey,
what's going on here?
Johnny, I don't think I'm the asshole. Jimmy,
What's
going
going on?
Fucking guy.
Hey, relax. What's going on?
I didn't like that shit at the park, man. That's bullshit.
What? It's none of your business, Pete. What are you doing? You got your business to do. Go ahead. Come on, buddy. Let's go. No, come on. I don't need that.
All right, so
I need you with
Johnny,
me.
you
I need you with me.
I'm
I'm not gonna get in the car with that fucking dick. Hey, fucking you're the dick. You fucking come on.
Pussy getting
What?
fucking ugly.
The
No
fuck out.
dress.
Hey, come on. Stop this shit. Okay, just stop. Go ahead. You got your fucking business to do. Come on. What's going on here?
All right.
Buy your guns.
Take care of business, brother.
All right, let's go. Come on, we're gonna leave. Buy your guns. Go ahead. Hey, stop with your guns in
Why
the
you
park,
even hanging
all right?
out with that guy in the first place, huh?
We're gonna do business.
Frankie, don't do business
All
with
right?
that fucking Mucker Ferguson.
What?
I said Mucker Ferguson.
Hey, come on, Johnny. Just chill the fuck out, all right?
Him back.
Come on.
Just chill out, all right?
What are you doing? I'm killing you, you fucking rape victim. I'll rape you again, you jail fucking house. Listen, spread your legs.
Why don't you
this
put
time
him to
and let me
sleep?
get the jelly.
It's all right.
What's the matter, P.O.? What does that mean? The deal's over? Oh, you fucking fag.
Shut up, all right? They're drunk, man. I'm sorry, all right? We'll talk later, right?
All right.
And we'll do it together without
Do
that.
business, none of this.
All right?
Stupid.
All right.
All right.
I love you, man. I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Sorry, all right? Well, you and I will do it later.
Tell you something. Get out of your fucking dome, dude. Mucker Ferguson. Did you hear this fucking guy?
Excuse me, right?
Mucker Ferguson.
Shut up.
What? What the fuck
What
you
the
so
fuck are
excited
you
about?
doing? Why do I bring him here, huh?
Hey, look, take
No,
it
why
easy,
the
all
fuck
right?
do I bring him here?
Hey, fucking take it down a peg,
don't
Jimmy.
Put your hands down,
Take
all right?
it fucking down
and
a
you,
peg, Jimmy.
why don't you fucking grow up already, right? You know, why the fuck I hang around with you? And you know something, Frankie? You know what?
Oh, what?
I tell you.
What?
Take your guns, go to the park,
Yeah.
sell them to
6
the
for
old
$5.
ladies, man, all right?
6 for $5
Yeah, do whatever
type
you're
thing?
gonna do because I'm out of it now.
6 for
That's
5
it.
type thing, Jimmy?
No, that's it.
Come on, Jimmy, man.
No, man, I'm tired of dealing with you.
Hey, look, why don't you relax? Come back and have a fuck. Imbibe with us, you fuck. Come on, Lakin.
Bye, Jimmy.
Hey, in all seriousness, good riddance, all right?
One of the intense things I hear in that is the overlapping dialogue in the first part of the clip, where we're on Adam Tracy, and I mean it's funny because these I all recognize from Purchase.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
And then, but I think Paulie Schultz is in the background, and we hear everything we need to hear. You know, obviously the important dialogue is in the foreground. And we hear that perfectly, but we just hear enough and we get a sense, and it's on mic, which is really surprising, of the conversation in the background.
Right, and I think that comes from the orientation of the microphone relative to the camera, because that awareness, I guess, is we're getting the foreground, and maybe the microphone, the back part of the microphone is actually getting the main front dialogue, but the microphone's pushed a little bit to the other guys to get a better sense of them. So the greatest point of sensitivity is actually at the background, and I'm kind of playing the back of the pattern of the microphone just enough to cover that foreground.
Yeah. I'm intensely curious to know about dailies. So that's another thing that's gone away. Watching end of the day, the previous day's rush, dailies. Was there a dailies process on this?
Well, 11-day shoot.
Yeah.
It probably took 2 days before we even saw anything.
Yep.
And therefore we were a quarter of the way done.
But
they're really, no, not really, because we were shooting and without, so minimally in terms of crew. They were just, I think they just went to the lab to check and kind of got an idea of it, but I don't even think they synced it up initially.
When the first time that Nick heard sunk dailies, what was his reaction? Were you aware of it?
I was definitely checking in with him. Is everything okay? I feel it's okay. I just wanted to make sure he was happy, and I think as I remember, it took like 3 or 4 days. We were halfway done before he actually got to see or hear anything. Of course, they ran, as I'm saying, they ran to the lab to make sure everything looked good and got a sense of it, but they didn't really sit down till much after, really kind of get
because it really is a commitment on a part of a director to say, yeah, I'm okay with this. I'm okay with what I think as an audience member allows us to buy into it is it matches camera perspective so perfectly.
And that is what we used to love.
Yeah.
And that's what we, I guess, to this day try to advocate for.
And that could be with or without multiple microphones, by the way.
That's right. I guess my technique is I try to give, at least in a dailies mix, even though we're recording multi-track, even with wires, is to give some sense of air in the room. So I do try to mix, to not give, just dry wires. If we have, of course, enough rehearsal, and there's not that many wires, you have time to do it. I also, I do set up a separate ambient mic, even on interior sets, a lot. Just depends on how reverberant the set might be, to give it a little more sense of room.
And I wonder if you could talk to me about the importance of off-screen dialogue. Do you try and go for that?
I don't worry about it too much unless it's easy to get. I generally will not necessarily set up a second boom just to cover that. If it's overlappy, if there is overlap, then I would, and we have to do it that way.
Right.
Certainly we would have a second boom or even wires mixed, however, whatever we would need to do to cover it. Yeah, I mean, it certainly scenes like this you would never be able to do on wires. That's why one boom kind of encompasses the whole thing. And of course, that's the way we really would hear it anyway. You're making people listening or making judgments about what they're focusing on. Like sitting in a dinner or in a restaurant somewhere, and you can pick up some conversations and exclude others, and maybe you'll tune into that one for some reason. It's kind of a brain process. So it's a little different here. You're getting through one speaker, and it's kind of directional, and you're losing those ambient cues of directionality. But if we were recording stereo, I suspect you'd be able to pick things out a little better.
Yeah.
That would be one thing that I did try to do on a movie once, was to actually record the whole thing in stereo. And we had lengthy discussions. It was an indie movie. The American Astronaut, it was called.
That's relatively recent.
No, that's an older movie. There was another, I don't know, it's similar name. Anyway, in the initial discussions of these guys were musicians. They wrote this screenplay, and they were really into kind of experimenting. And we were talking at length during the pre-production, and I said, I have an idea, but you have to really kind of adhere to the concept. And if you shoot it in a certain way, we might be able to record this actually in stereo. And we tried that on day one. And of course, I backed it up in a way that would be usable if it wasn't, if it didn't work, and they kind of didn't quite get it. So we had to revert back to our original thing. I think Hal Hartley's work would more readily lend itself to recording stereo, and I had suggested that to him a while back.
Yeah.
But the way he works, it really not vital. Not
Yeah.
vital.
And Jim Jarmusch too comes to mind.
That certainly, yeah.
Style. Yeah, interesting. I think we should start to close.
Yeah.
I wanted to relay a story to you and get your reaction. Well, David Newman is our shipping guy, and he wanted, I promised him a tour of a post-production facility when one of my classes went on.
Post-production, you said?
Yeah, post-production. Okay. And anyways, long story. We never went.
Is this on tape?
Yeah, it's tape. It's cheap, right?
Okay.
It's not film.
Right. We're not film. I keep forgetting.
And our class never went, and so I set something up.
So you feel guilty?
Well, I set something up to go visit Tom Fleischman.
Nice.
And of course, like in my mind, I was like, I'm bringing David to Tom Fleischman, but really, I was thrilled to go too. We started talking to Tom and asking questions, and we were curious about how he feels about wireless mic versus boom, And I kind of thought he was going to say, oh, you know, it used to be that the boom was everything, but in 2018, we can make the wireless mics sound great. And the truth is, Tom Fleischman said, boom it. If you can boom it, boom it. He would much rather mix, in terms of re-recording, dialogue recorded off of the boom mic.
So how do I feel about that? I wholeheartedly agree. The issue is the production being on set is our limit.
Yeah.
You know, that's what our goal, that's what we all try to do, or we'd like to do, but we are sometimes limited. And of course, there's a difference between film production, making a movie, and television. There are definitely differences there. Certainly a director, it's his movie. And a TV show, it's a lot of people's TV show.
Right, it's the factory's show. Yeah.
I'm a little surprised that he said that, and I don't know Tom well at all. But, you know, I know he's worked with Chris Newman numerous times over the years, and Chris has, in a lot of ways, advocated for multi-track.
Well, and I think, to be fair, he went on to say, you know, signal to noise is still the thing, and so if the boom is noisier than a lav, then that's
certainly.
Go with
but we're outside in New York City, we're really kind of.
Yeah, and I think if this does make it to tape, that should be said, is it's still about signal to noise.
Yes.
But in terms of, you know, I mean, he specifically brought up wide and tight shots that, you know, where it's just the close-up is from a lav because there's no choice.
Right, and I still argue that, and I'm about to start my 5th season on a show, and there are times that I still have to argue that.
Yeah. And I think some shows have made great strides, and I suspect it's shows where the actors are part of the producing team. The Washington D.C. one is named
House of Cards.
House of Cards, where, you know, they can crash the wide shot with a boom. You know, if it's a static wide, they can crash with a boom.
Right. So it's not all the time, but they certainly can do, and you can do that.
It's a nod, and it's a. Yeah.
It is. I mean, if the technology then allows that, it's a thing we should take advantage of, because the boom is going to sound certainly better. You know, I mean, a film that I did, Rachel Getting Married. That was the movie I've been waiting. After Laws of Gravity, I waited, I don't know, maybe 20 years for an opportunity to do a movie like similar.
And
however,
we should say, just a brief interruption, Chris Newman interviewed you about that.
He did.
And you it's in our archives somewhere, and we'll have a link in the description. But anyways.
No, I mean, when I had the opportunity to interview for that, I heard they had interviewed numerous people, and certainly Chris Newman was Jonathan Demme's sound guy for years, and of course Chris got the call, which made, of course. But he declined it, as I understand, for certain reasons. To this day, I'm not sure I know the reasons, but I get it. And I walked in reading the script, and they had, of course, given me some insight prior to coming into it. And I brought Laws of Gravity with me, and I handed everybody a copy, and I said, conceptually, I think this is what you guys are looking for.
What made you say that?
In their description of it, Jonathan kind of wants to make like a documentary feel, but it is kind of a narrative, and he wants to do multi-camera, but he wants to do all the music at the same time, and I'm like, okay, then I think what we have to do, certainly it was multi-track, and we handled that in a certain way, but the challenges were similar to Laws of Gravity. Of course, much more technical, but I totally understood it. And I think that just comes from my career experiences, how to handle it. And so, you know, maybe the first 3 days I was sitting on the edge of my seat figuring, I'm probably going to get fired. And Jonathan Demme came to me and he said, you know, I went to him actually. I said, so how's it going?
Right.
And he's like, you know, I'm like, that, you know,
One
took
more
some
day.
pressure
Yeah,
off.
right, yeah.
But, you know, every day was a challenge. But at the same time, I would go back to my hotel room every night, do my research. This is the scene we're going to do, and kind of get in a sense of how we were going to shoot it. And I actually was not getting a lot of sleep, and mainly because I was so excited about getting back to work.
Because you felt like your contributions.
Yeah, I
could
mean,
help
it
tell the
was
story.
such a whole integrated part. There was really no way they could really dub anything. It's all, a lot of it was improv. It was scripted, but a lot of it being improv, that, you know, it really had to be covered. So I really did have a conceptual grasp. And I do listen to a lot of different types of music and how it's recorded, classical music, the way that's recorded, and other types. And having that experience along with other early experiences with booms and mics and things really lent itself to a conceptual way of thinking about that particular movie. So, you know, it certainly crossed that line of documentary narrative, but it still had a kind of sound narrative. It was a big movie. And we had to cover a lot of things. There are a lot of famous, well, in my mind, elements in that movie that are like, I don't even know how it really made it happen, but we did. And with minimal, you know, minimalist, meaning we didn't have a 48-track truck.
No,
He didn't want to do that.
I remember two things from the interview, and I would encourage people to read it. Fostex 824, right? Was
Two of them.
Two of them.
But just back up.
Right, so 8 tracks, essentially.
Right.
And Roger Phoenix.
Right.
Is a documentary sound person you brought in to be the music truck.
In essence, yes.
Music truck.
Yes. You know, it became obvious after a couple of days how we really needed to really do it. I had concept, but we just needed a few more tracks. So Roger came in and actually recorded. He was the music guy, I guess you did, you know, call it. And he would record stereo music while we're doing the dialogue. And of course, we're hearing the music's playing anyway. So it's all got to be kind of mixed together. So either he would send me a signal and I would be able to play with it a little bit on one track, while we still had the ISO tracks, him recording, but we were able to, you know, I was able to kind of integrate it all. Right. It's really funny moments because we're recording. It's really mostly acoustic instruments.
Yeah.
But I remember what's his name, Robin Hitchcock, coming to us and said, "Oh, sound man, more reverb, please." And I'm like, we're laughing because it's like there's no PA system or anything, but he's like, wants more reverb.
Was he just playing? Did he?
It was a group of musicians outside, kind of, him and some other musicians playing, but he wanted more reverb.
That's funny. I'm out of questions. I think we've talked a lot.
Let me ask you. No, I'm only kidding.
Well, no, that's fair, but I'm curious to know if you guys have any questions. Whoa. Anything?
Did it come out okay?
That was really impressive. I think you covered it really well.
Really?
I mean,
I feel like I always miss points.
Well, we always do, and also, you know, the beauty of YouTube is you can always add stuff in text, stuff. But or you can come back and we can reshoot.
We could do that. Okay.
I do, you know, because I think the audience for this is people starting out. I do want to. I think I want to ask one more question on their behalf, which is, what advice? What if you can give me a sense of, you know, there's a customer that's coming in, somebody coming into Gotham, they're putting a kit together. You know, I always feel funny because I've been in their shoes, and it's how can you give me a sense of how can they strike a balance between equipment and ideas?
Unfortunately, I don't mean unfortunately, but I think the ability to learn certain aspects and techniques or develop your own techniques is kind of limited these days because the first thing out is, and depending on the level of production you're doing, everybody expects wires now. I've mentored a number of people, and I suggest to them, listen, number one, get some boom experience. Work for somebody who has some experience, and you'll learn something. You have to have some practical hands-on experience. And then, but in their search for work and listing, or however it's done these days.
Well, and I think it's worth talking about, a lot of the work for these men and women start with reality television.
I think even before that, not even reality television, I think it comes from even before they can get there, because so much of reality television now is turning into union work. Too, there of course is some, and you may know better than I am, just really talking off the top of my head, but I feel like my students, sorry about that, coming back to me and saying, there really isn't those opportunities. And when I go to get a job or look, they say, what equipment do you have? So the issue is they want to know you have wires, but they don't know what they're doing. They don't know anything about sound. They're trying to rely on somebody, and yet they want you to list the equipment so they know what you have. It's meaningless, but from the person who's actually going to do the sound, I have to say, look, get yourself a nice little multi-track recorder, and then basically you probably should have 2 or 3 wireless mics and at least one boom, obviously a boom, but probably a matching microphone to that boom, not just one microphone.
And the transition from, let's say it's reality type production, nonfiction production,
okay,
to feature films. Any advice to make that transition? Like, what should they be talking to the director about?
Basically how, and I would hope they have some boom experience and understand how to really get it on the microphone. But I would, and this is when I do teach myself, I have to play the game of, well, you should learn how to do good wires. And part of that is because you're not an experienced boom person. Mm-hmm. So what I've discovered in my teaching over the years is the student sound has improved. And it's improved because at least I give them good wiring techniques that they can use, because until they learn how to use a boom, or if there's no one in their class that knows how to boom, they don't follow the sound right. So the best way to get the sound initially, maybe in these indie movies and these low budget things, is to learn how to wire well, so at least it sounds good and it's present. And, if you have to follow action or something, it's not necessarily going to be so easy until you gain experience with booming. So I do have to advocate for learning how to boom, understand what the microphones can do, and listen when you're booming. But certainly now that you have multi-track, you can do both.
Excellent. All right, I think we should wrap it up. So as always, visit the archives at gothamsound.tv. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Send your ideas or questions to info@gothamsound.com. If you have any questions for Jeff, send them there. We'll forward them on to you.
Great.
Is that right?
Yes.
And thank you for watching. And thank you guys. Thanks to the crew for making this happen.